Breaking news, this is your World War III emergency update. You know, every so often I get a piece of information that confirms and corroborates all of our worst fears and speculations about the current wars that are unfolding around the world. And today is no exception. The information that I'm about to share with you today, I assure you, you have not heard on any other YouTube channel. You probably haven't heard on any other social media. If you have, it's been a very small blip on the radar. But it is of crucial importance because this document that has just been released by a NATO government, a government of a country who's a member of NATO, confirms all of our worst fears about what's about to unfold. I want to thank in advance a subscriber who provided this information to me because this indeed is a treasure trove of information about NATO's game plan on how they're going to get us all ready for World War III. I hope you're ready for this one. What to do in case of war. Now, disregard the 72. Many people are familiar with all those bug-out bag, emergency FEMA type guides. They're very dismissive and very short-winded, and they don't really provide you much information that you can't find with one Google search. Basically, pack a bug-out bag and wait for the government to tell you what to do. This is far more extensive and comprehensive, and it goes into great depth about how to survive in a war zone, which foretells exactly what they are expecting. So please stick with me as I go through this guide, and because we can extrapolate from this, I believe, what is about to unfold. This is very current. This was just released, as far as I know. We had to have it translated from Latvian, and we did that utilizing some online tools, which appear to be quite effective because it's very coherent and easy to read. I'll post a link to the original document in the comment section below. Now, the document entitled, What to Do in Case of War, disregard the 72 hours, like I said, because this really should be 72 months. And they drop some hints in there with respect to how bad it's really going to get. Latvia's security depends on our individual and collective readiness in the event of a crisis. This is our joint task to strengthen national defense, and we can only do it by supplementing our knowledge and preparing for a possible crisis situation. Now, you can only present an extensive guide like this to a population who is ready to receive it. The Baltic states are right on the front lines. If you were to release information like this in the United States or France or even Germany, this would likely invoke panic in the population if they were told about it. Because let's face it, without media attention on the topics like these, it'd likely just go under the radar. It is raising awareness of national security issues, the ability to handle weapons. Remember, they're talking to the civilian population here. The ability to handle weapons, more active involvement in national defense, the ability to take care of oneself and one's fellow human beings, as well as the desire to engage in pre-informed and learn all forms of national defense support. Now, I don't know what the gun laws are like in Latvia. I presume, like most places in Europe, they're rather restrictive. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But isn't it funny, and this is just a sidebar before we get into the nitty-gritty here, isn't it funny how they take your guns away during peacetime and they put those guns in your hand during wartime? What a surprise. The purpose of this informative material, they say, is to provide information to citizens of Latvia to help them prepare for war by planning the necessary resources in time and the development action algorithms. Most of the information included in the manual can be used in peacetime, but some sections can be used when a special legal regime has been established. Martial law is what they're talking about. And the state emergency is intended to overcome the country's military threat in an organized manner. So a lot of this is catered towards martial law. I want you to extrapolate what we're going to talk about to your country, okay? Because this can happen and will happen in your country when shit hits the fan. The first thing they say, and I'm not going to go over each little nook and cranny, just the points that jumped out at me when I read it. It should be taken into account that electricity, water, heating, and gas supplies may be interrupted as a result of hostilities. The operation of telecommunications, mobile communications, and internet services, ATMs, payment by bank card, shops, and pharmacies may be completely or partially disrupted. 72 hours? I don't think so. They're calling for a 72-month prep. Funds should cover minimum needs for at least a 72-hour period. However, as the experience of Ukraine shows, in the case of war, it would be necessary to provide water and food for the longest possible period of time. Longest possible period of time. So you mean that 72 hours that you wrote on here was just bullshit? Yes. When I tell people, buy food, buy food, buy food, I mean it. If I'm just going to do a video, in fact, I'm going to release a video, and the entire video is going to be me saying, buy food, get water, or find a way to treat water, ammo, gold, precious metals, the whole 9 yards. I'm just going to repeat that over and over again for like 10 hours. That's going to be the video. Because this is the most important thing that you can do right now. Food, water, tools, firearms, medicine, shelter, I mean, all of the core essentials. Stockpile, 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 stockpile while the getting is good. Don't be bamboozled and suckered into this market that is melting up right now. Okay, so they talk about adaptation of basement or underground spaces for shelter needs. And they go into great depth here, more depth than I've ever heard in, there's manuals, like military manuals, and there's probably some Cold War era stuff. But in terms of modern documents, this is the most extensive. The best choice is a basement with a reinforced concrete cover and masonry walls. Shelves made of durable material are created along the walls, which can provide additional support for the wall. Fill the shelf as well as the beds function of place. If the basement has windows, prepare bags filled with sand and other loose materials or concrete blocks so that you can cover them up. Now, of course, that's going to serve multiple purposes, not just for the explosive shock of blasts, but also for ionizing radiation. Okay, it's going to attenuate the effects. This is why I tell people you have to have sandbags. Get sandbags now, because in an emergency, sandbags, you can't get them. Most of the places, the manufacturers of sandbags, their whole business model depends on feast or famine. So when there's a disaster, they sell out right away, and then they don't sell anything for 6 months, and then they sell out right away. So it's during those 6 months, that's when you need to be stocking up. One of the other more practical tips that they provide here, and I'm just really scratching the surface of this, okay, is that you should have a roadmap in printed form. We've done numerous videos on all of the topics that we're going to talk about today in this video, but one thing you absolutely should have is an extensive topographical map. And not all maps are created equal. You can get a very extensive small scale ratio map that goes into great detail, or you can get one of those fold-out maps. Those fold-out maps are not going to really do you much good if you are really trying to navigate precarious, congested terrain, and you need to know the finer details of the landscape. You need to get a topographical map of your region, or a map book that goes into great depth. If your map is covering a whole entire state and you can hold it in your hand, it is not a high enough ratio map. Okay, you need a map. I don't know the actual ratio, but you just need to have a map that has more details. The more details, and if you can get the topography as well, the better, especially in the case of war. They go on to medication. If medication is expired, they say, hand it over to pharmacies for disposal. I take issue with this because we know, based on the Shelf Life Extension Program study done by the U.S. military, that there are numerous medications that will actually still be potent enough to have an effect long after their expiration dates. You can go and check out our video on the Shelf Life Extension program. Okay, this is very important information because a lot of people are not going to take medications because they think they're expired, and I'm not saying you do that, but this was done by the US government. And they confirmed, and the reason why they did it is because they had billions of dollars worth of medications and they were going to have to throw it all out. And so they did a bunch of tests with a bunch of guys in lab coats. And the guys in lab coats said that, yeah, this stuff is still potent in some cases up to 20 years after. Not for all medicine, but for some. So that would be one part of this guide that I kind of take issue with. Most of it, though, is pretty good. The other thing they talk about is documents and information, especially if you're in a war zone. This is going to be incredibly important stuff. Now, we're going to get into the good stuff. I know a lot of you guys already know a lot of this stuff, but let's just jump to the good stuff because, you know, we're not rookies here on this channel anymore. They provide some other, you know, more topical information like upload maps that do not require internet. Yes, you can use your smartphone. We've done videos on smartphone and all the apps. You want to get apps that don't require a connection to the internet, obviously. GPS doesn't require the internet. Will GPS be functioning in World War III? Probably not. But if we don't go space warfare and if there's no EMPs that knock out all the satellites, then you may have GPS for a short period of time. But GPS does require ground-based relay stations in order to keep those GPS satellites calibrated. So after a few months of Mad Max, that GPS is probably going to be leading you astray if it's still functioning. Now, this one is important. How to protect yourself against misinformation. Do not believe the news that the National Armed Forces have stopped fighting and that NATO will not help. Okay, let me read that again. Because they're priming people. This is the most important part. This is, you know, when you know they're getting real in the document. Because everything else is just kind of fluff before this point. Do not believe the news that the National Armed Forces have stopped fighting and that NATO will not help. It sounds like this government knows that their people are not confident in Article 5, that NATO is going to come to their aid. This is a common way to demoralize the population. Also, remember that in the event of an enemy attack, the NBS will resist tenaciously, they claim. Do not disseminate information about the movement and location of the NBS. I'm presuming that the NBS is national, I'm presuming that's the term for their national military, or civil defense. Thus, you can harm those who protect you. So don't disseminate information. So they're basically already getting people ready to accept the laws that are currently in place in Ukraine. Now, some of these I can understand, you know, but I can't accept well, I shouldn't even get into that or else this video will be flagged. But I can't accept some of the draconian policies that are currently in play in Ukraine. We'll save that for the daily update video, the 24-hour daily dose of doom and gloom. Do not share unverified information about the progress of hostilities. Basically, they want you to shut the hell up and just not say anything to anybody else around the world about what's going on about the current situation. Only Latvian security and defense authorities have such data. Information from other sources or private social media accounts may be false. Check patriotic but questionable messages and appeals. An aggressor may hide behind slogans and Latvian national symbols. So essentially, they're trying to create a situation where you're only allowed to believe and parlay information that has been vetted by the government. What they don't really get into in this document is the expropriation of your resources and possibly your labor, conscripting you to do stuff. Remember what happened in Ukraine, Latvians, my Latvian viewers. Everything that is happening in Ukraine will happen in your country. Mark my words. Everything that is happening in that country will happen in your country. When you see guys getting dragged off the streets into vans, fighting with the commissars, and Western media is not reporting on it, you're going to be on your own. So use this time before the fighting starts wisely. They talk about seeking places of refuge. Get a load of this. Shelters are places to take shelter in order to reduce the impact from the shock wave of an explosion, debris, thermal radiation, or radioactive pollution, and can be created or installed in basements or underground floors of various structures. For example, basements of residential buildings, underground parking lots, and underpasses. They're basically queuing you up there so that you're ready for nuclear war. They know if NATO gets involved, there is a very, very high chance that this goes nuclear. But they also then know that even if it goes nuclear, that it's survivable. And that's the scary part. They go into detail about what to do when you hear sirens, okay? The notification will provide you with information about the possible place and time of an emergency event, yada, yada, yada. They go on about the rules of when you're inside a shelter. So what you should do before you go into your shelter, into hibernation mode. Turn off the gas, electricity, the water, close the windows and the ventilation hatches, etc., etc. They go into the psychology of surviving in a shelter in this document, which is something that you don't get unless you're really on the brink of war. They go into what to do during a shooting, how to survive mortar fire. And all of this is presented in, it's not presented in a war manual type way. It's presented with the usual generic, nice, family-friendly, PG graphics, infographics. So what I'm telling you, it sounds like it's being read from a military how-to manual, but this is for the general public's consumption, okay? They got all the usual clip art type graphics to kind of make it seem a little bit more palatable. If your house falls in the zone of regular armed conflicts, it is necessary to strengthen the windows. So they go into home fortification. They talk about what to do when you hear, the whistling of projectiles over your head. You should find at least a small depression. And that's actually really good advice. I've heard that if you are in one of these war zones and, even a little bit of dirt, like even if you're just slightly below the horizon line, that can mean the difference between life and death or just being permanently maimed and injured for the rest of your life. Cover your ears with your hands and open your mouth. This will protect you from injury. So this is how you deal with the blast, okay? The effects of the burst, so you don't burst your eardrums. Really good information, but very specific. A metal trash can or porch steps can also protect you. Do not hide behind cars or kiosks. So they're talking not about like a small metal trash can, they're talking about the big ones. And in fact, I've talked about this in some of our urban survival strategy videos before. Those big trash cans, they can stop moderately sized caliber munitions, especially if you get two sides of them and if you fill them with stuff on top of that. Those things are essentially pillboxes. Now, not all calibers, especially if you have armor-piercing rounds, it's going to go right through that. But if you're just small arms fire and you fortify them with sandbags and stuff, yeah, that's going to be, you use that in combination with trees, downing trees. I mean, trees are exceptionally good at stopping gunfire. That's why, they're a big part of our defensive strategy on the homestead is because, you gotta just use nature. Nature, whether it's dirt or trees, that's like the number one easiest way to defend, to create obstructions, to prevent people from going into places. And they also don't draw as much attention as big castle walls. They go into great detail about how to survive a chemical attack, and I'm not going to go into great depth about that, but they really put a lot of emphasis on that section. It's like 6 pages long. They go on to say, and this is, I'm really skipping through, I could do a whole video on just the how to survive the combat zone aspect of this from a civilian point of view now. This is not from the perspective of someone in the military. If you are in a military conflict zone, it is recommended that you listen to the following recommendations. Always carry identification documents. So you need to have your papers, right? Keep money and documents in different places so you have more possibilities to save them. Not the best translation there, but you get the point. Have alternate currencies, I would say, especially if you're in Europe. You don't know where you're going to end up. I would say any adjacent country, you should have the currency, or I guess the euro would apply there as well. But still, you never know what's going to happen with the euro, right? In a situation like this. Keep information about your blood type and possible health outcomes. Definitely know your blood type. If you don't know your blood type and you're in a war zone, that's just something you absolutely need to know. Now, I didn't know my blood type until a few years ago, believe it or not. Okay, now this is important. This is very important. This is actually really good information. This is high-level preparedness, Mad Max, SHTF stuff. What not to do. Do not tell people of dubious reputation and strangers about your plans. I mean, this is the government telling you this. So, I got to give the Latvian government props because you would never get that kind of advice. Like just street smarts. What do they tell you in New York City? Go inside, stay inside, and wait for the mainstream media to tell you what to do. They're really getting you thinking about this scenario here. Do not tell people of dubious reputation, that's subjective, but obviously in some cases you're going to know, and strangers about your plans. And absolutely do not, only provide the base minimum amount of information that is required. This is like what they teach guys who work in intelligence. Only provide the most bare minimum amount of information that you need to. Do not argue with strangers and avoid any possible provocations. So they're talking about maintaining a gray man profile. Try to approximate the baseline of the environment you're in. If everybody's driving white trucks, drive white trucks. If everybody's wearing plaid, wear plaid. If everybody is dressed in hip-hop garb, wear hip-hop garb. This is why you might want to even consider having various costumes. Some cases might require you to don the political insignia of the opposition just to get through a certain place. These are things you need to think about. There's no shame in that. Okay? If it's about survival, you got to do what you have to do for you and your family to survive. Avoid convoys and do not stand near military vehicles. I mean, they're telling you how close this war is going to get to Latvia right here. Do not take pictures or film if there are people in military uniforms nearby. Do not try to film them, their actions, even if you think what they're doing is illegal. What? Do not take pictures or film if there are people in military uniforms nearby. Do not try to film their actions, even if you think what they're doing is illegal. Whew, man, have an exit plan. Do not observe the hostilities. Hide as soon as you hear shots. Do not carry weapons. And I'm not sure if I told you guys about this, but the Polish government recently pushed through a legislation that is going to limit the amount of, it's going to essentially allow Polish soldiers to get away with doing more. So they're not going to be penalized for taking aggressive actions in the time of war, essentially allowing them to more free reign in terms of what they're able to do and get away with. And of course, you would do that if you were concerned that people were going to be hesitant in certain situations, right? Do not carry weapons or show military personnel anything that resembles a weapon, even just in shape. Do not take abandoned weapons or ammunition. Do not touch explosives or even suspicious objects. Do not try to disassemble or move them. Even simple household objects can be mined. Instead, call the single emergency number. That's actually really good advice because it's true. You might see something that looks rather enticing on the ground. It might look like a backpack. Maybe you're hungry and this backpack is full and it's right in the middle of the road and it looks like bait. If it looks like bait, I would avoid it. Okay? If it looks too good to be true, I would avoid it. Do not wear military uniforms, camouflage, or clothing with sleeves. Choose dark clothing that does not attract attention. Avoid any symbols as they may cause an unpredictable reaction. This is from the government of Latvia. Choose clothing that does not attract attention. So what are they preparing for here? They're preparing to be overrun by the Russians. There's more. Water. Access to water is likely to be blocked with the intention of forcing the defenders to surrender or disrupt it as a result of damage to water treatment facilities and pipelines. So they're talking essentially about a blockade or an embargo, a strategy in order to starve the people out. Okay? So they go into depth about how you can prepare for that, practically speaking, in terms of how you can purify water. Medicine. They go into some tips and tricks around using super glue and things like that to close wounds. We have a special guest coming on doing a series of videos about medicine that are going to be incredibly useful to people. There's somebody who spent 60 days in the wilderness on the TV show Alone, and they're a doctor as well. So they almost won. But unfortunately, another guest that we've had on actually was victorious, but they were very, very close. And the information he's going to provide to you is going to be life-saving, I assure you. In terms of mobile signals, cell phones should be put on airplane mode and turned off before entering such public places. So this is probably how they're going to manage information. And information dissemination and sharing is by telling people that if you have your phone off of airplane mode, you could potentially get bombed, right? Because enemy fire is going to be drawn to places where the signals of many mobile phones are received. This is an interesting one, and this is quite telling. This tells you that, they ain't messing around. Civilians will face inconvenience when many of the measures of recommendations mentioned above are implemented. For example, the diet will need to be balanced, but it will cause discord. So they're talking about social cohesion here, okay? It will cause discord if the way in which it is done seems unfair. So they're essentially saying how you divvy up food and supplies could create conflict within your group. This is, I'm sorry if I'm, repeating this over and over again, but you never get this kind of information in a government publication. This is the stuff we talk about on this channel. In order to not to interfere with civil protection measures, it's necessary to discuss and agree on a specific course of action together with the residents of the area. So you establish a plan, a rationing schedule or regimen that everybody can agree to before you start diving in. The community must agree on the storage and distribution of food and other supplies, the observance of hygiene measures, and the burial of dead bodies. That's an odd one to throw in there at the end, isn't it? Discussing difficult topics before they become the reality will reduce the shock and strengthen the will. But they make a good point, right? So it's interesting how they throw in just the distribution of food and burying dead bodies. Because, of course, when that happens, you're going to have people freaking out. But if you prime people for it in advance so that they know it could be a reality, it can take some of the edge off when it actually happens. It's one of those unsettling things. There's another prepping channel, City Prepping, who did a video on, how to remove bodies from, and it's surprising coming from him, right? Because he's a pretty brand safe kind of channel. But it's an important thing that you're going to potentially have to contend with, and everybody's going to have to contend with that in any disaster. Citigroup should appoint trustees to meet with NBS, NATO, or military representatives of the aggressor's armed forces, depending on which country controls the territory, to discuss issues affecting the security of civilians. So they're already setting it up for the Russians to have taken over certain territories. If you follow these instructions, you can survive. Survival is resistance. I kind of like that part. That's a cool saying. Survival is a resistance. Survival is resistance. If you cannot participate in an armed struggle with the enemy, support the National Armed Forces. Help the armed forces build anti-mobility barriers and fortify defensive positions. Support the armed forces with transport, comms, capabilities, drones, equipment, and food. Anyone can support the armed forces with intelligence gathering. Don't wait for a special invitation, they say. Take a photo of yours, surveillance, and forest cameras. Share data obtained by drones. Take into account that surveillance cameras that work in online mode can be used by the opponent, of course, through cyber attacks. If there's a chance for the cameras to reach the enemy, destroy them. Defense forces have critical information about the adversary. Any information about forward command posts, radar and electronic warfare units, geolocation or resupply or transport centers. You know, they got all of this information probably from Ukraine. This is all modeled off the Ukraine war. I'm sure there's stuff that goes back years, but because, you know, they're talking about cell phones and things that have only been around in modern conflicts, you know that a lot of this is informed through the Ukraine war. If in an occupied territory, evacuate to the part of the country controlled by the NBS. Continue to comply with the laws of the Republic of Latvia and do not cooperate with the occupying power. So they're trying to do this to undermine the occupying power when they do occupy, because just like in Ukraine right now, you have a lot of people who, you know, when they're in these occupied territories, they don't know if they're going to be liberated by either side again, and they don't know if they're going to be called traitors when it all happens. So it's a very tough spot to be in. How much do you comply with the occupiers, and how much do you stay true to the people who are occupying, or the original government of the country, of said country? Separate from their decisions and actions, they say. Do not participate in public events organized by them without giving them interviews and without asking to be filmed. Do not participate in illegal elections, referenda, or popular votes. So they're talking, of course, about the annexed territories in Ukraine, right? So guys, I'm going to leave a link to this. This is, you know, some people are going to say, oh, it's not a big deal. Just imagine a couple years ago, something like that coming out. That should be mainstream news headlines. Ask yourself why it isn't. Now, I'm going to save the daily update component of this video for another video that I'll release probably a few hours after this one. There's a lot of stuff going on, and it's too much to cram into one video. In fact, it's probably about 30 pages of information. Keep on prepping, my friends. The best way to support this channel is to gear up through CanadianPreparedness.com. If you're a person who doesn't like doing the online thing, you can phone us at our 1-800 number. You can talk to a real person in North America. We don't do over-the-phone consulting, so it has to be about an order that you're placing. We don't have the manpower in order to do that. I would love to talk to all of you one-on-one and offer whatever advice I could, but I just don't have that capacity. I'm too busy prepping by myself right now. Most of the information, you can find it from our videos. But if you do have questions about various products, call us at our 1-800 number. I'll post it in the description section below. We have almost 3,000 preparedness products, top tier stuff, from food to weapons, you name it. Now, we got it all, and it all ships from Canada. We ship to the United States as well. You can use coupon code SURVIVALPREPPER for 10% off. Pretty much everything with the exception of the freeze drying machines. We can't do 10% off of those, but everything else, and free shipping over $200 to the United States, and free shipping over, $75 to Canada, I believe. Now, we don't have the 2-day shipping that Amazon does. Quite frankly, I've been using Amazon for probably over 15 years. And I can tell you, there was a time when you could find some really good deals on Amazon. Not anymore. A lot of companies don't want to sell on there. A lot of the stuff that we sell, you can't find on Amazon. And I can tell you one thing about Amazon. Good luck phoning Amazon and talking to a real person who speaks good English, who's not based out of some call center on the other side of the ocean. Okay, our people are in-house, they know the products, and they can help you find what you're looking for. And they're going to remember you. That's the most important part. That's really all we can offer as a small business. We don't have a bunch of robots, moving around in an automation, packing orders and stuff like that. And that's how it's going to be until the shit hits the fan. So if you want to support us, that's the best way to do it. Go and check out our store, CanadianPreparedness.com, and check out this what to do in case of war. I'm very surprised at the level of detail, and thank you once again for the person who sent me that information. Take care, guys.